All right, continuing with more news in relation to the BRICS Summit, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Gwede Mantashe, says that collaboration between government and the private sector is important to ensure energy availability in the country. While Mantashe says that partnerships are a better and less risky option for energy security. He was speaking at the Energy Cooperation Forum in Midrand Gallagher Convention Centre in Johannesburg. So perhaps for more on this, we're going to be joined by Professor Sampson Mamphweli. He's the Energy Secretariat at South Africa's National Energy Development Institute. Prof Sampson, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon to you and the viewers.
We're obviously edging closer to the BRICS Summit, and we're looking at some of the issues that are set atop the agenda. And the energy crisis is such that comes to the fore. Wonder at this point how important it is for South Africa to make meaningful partnerships in the energy space. How could fostering these partnerships with BRICS energy investors, assist in the long run?
I couldn't hear you properly, but I believe you were talking about the fact that the energy crisis has been coming out sharply during the BRICS Summit. That is quite correct. There's been quite a lot of discussions around that, and most of the discussions revolved around the fact that South Africa can learn from our BRICS counterparts, and one of the issues that was discussed were the fact that China, for instance, it has got quite a lot of renewable energy generation that they have on their grid. So we can learn in terms of how did they manage to get so much renewables into the grid without basically disrupting the system in a negative kind of manner. There have been talks about the fact that Brazil, for instance, is very much forward when it comes to issues of bioenergy, and then we need to learn lessons from Brazil as South Africa, and also there are issues around the security of supply versus the just energy transition, where there were talks about issues around South Africa learning from countries such as Russia when it comes to the nuclear build. South Africa also learning from other BRICS countries when it comes to how they plan their own transition from high carbon economy to low carbon economy. So those kind of discussions are taking place. I'm going to be forming a part of a session where we will be talking about the role of energy efficiency in a just transition kind of a situation, where we'll be going deep into how can we use energy efficiency, for instance, to assist the country when it comes to issues of the just energy transition, to ensure that we create jobs using energy efficiency. We don't disrupt the system before we have new generation capacity coming on board. So those are some of the issues that are being discussed at the BRICS Summit at the moment.
Prof, I'm going to attempt to ask you another question, and hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for those sentiments and for giving us that concise summary. Perhaps as we look at the issue of infrastructure over the years, infrastructure has played a major role, perhaps in getting to where we are in relation to the energy crisis. I wonder if we could look or unpack infrastructure and development within the energy sector, perhaps also coming to the fore during the summit.
Yeah, I heard you talking about the infrastructure. Yes, there have been discussions around the energy infrastructure, your transmission and distribution grid, and the minister talked about that. Minister Mantashe talked about the fact that we don't have enough grid capacity to evacuate new generation capacity that South Africa is busy with, and there were calls for the private investors to come on board as well and assist in a public-private partnership kind of a situation where we can then strengthen the grid, especially in areas such as your Northern Cape and the Western Cape, where we don't have enough grid capacity. So there are ideas around how we can then build new grid capacity to support the new generation capacity that South Africa is planning, and also learning from countries such as China that have got extensive grid capacity, that are able to take in huge renewable energy megawatts through their transmission and distribution system. So all those discussions are currently taking place.
Prof, let me wrap up this conversation. Solar is obviously a role player in the energy sector at this point. I wonder also if there are other sources of energy generation that BRICS nations at large should consider in the future.
Yes, there are other energy sources that are being considered. There were talks about the gas reserves that we have mainly in the Southern African region, including some of the reserves that South Africa is busy with exploration. So those are being planned. The minister also talked about the fact that the new integrated resource plan will be issued next week, the draft, so that people can start commenting on the integrated resource plan. And we expect that in the new generation capacity, in terms of the ministerial determination, we will still have some share of solar energy and some share of wind energy, as well as the gas and the nuclear energy. The minister touched slightly on the fact that the current nuclear power plant that we have at Quebec is currently giving us, energy at a much cheaper cost than any other energy source. And when they run the models for the integrated resource plan, those are some of the things that they consider. They consider the least cost technology amongst other things. And if the Quebec nuclear power station is one of the least cost energy source at the moment, we expect nuclear to feature prominently in the new draft integrated resource plan. Obviously, we will have things such as your small hydro, because South Africa doesn't have that much water, and things like that.
Prof, thank you for those sentiments, and we're obviously monitoring developments throughout the day. Professor Sampson Mamphweli, Energy Secretariat at South Africa's National Energy Development Institute, really looking at some of the initiatives with regards to solving South Africa's energy crisis, taking lessons from some of the other countries, including Brazil and China, and other sources of energy at this point as we manage the just transition at large. Again, thank you to Prof Sampson for his time with us on the SABC.